My name is Dean Zimmerman. I'm the editor of Deadpool and Wolverine.
My name is Shane Reed. I am the other editor of Deadpool and Wolverine.
What we're looking at here is our entire film strung together. We have 8 reels in total. We always want to collab on how we lay out tracks, but always try to keep in mind and be flexible with how others like to work as well. I usually start out with 4 video tracks when I'm just cutting dailies and 12 audio tracks. I'm a little old school when it comes to my audio tracks. I do not use the stereo single track layout for like a music or effects. I keep it a pretty simple 2 mono tracks left and right. Obviously, we label every track that we have. Most of the time, 4 dialogue tracks, 4 to 6 effects tracks, and then 4 music tracks, sometimes 6, depending on what we need. We did temp mixes, and I think in this case, our preview mixes. So what you're looking at here is not necessarily our working tracks. They are in a sense, but because we've done temp mixes, we get crash downs from our sound guys. And as you can see, we've labeled them as effect stems, some footsteps or Foley, and then our backgrounds, and then our composer stems, and then our source music. And then as we are making changes from preview to preview and continuing down the process, we either add some more music tracks and some more dialogue tracks. We always carry production dialogue on this layout of the timeline just because we'll be adding new ADR and new takes and whatnot. So we will be always carrying those, updating those, as well as the temp dialogue tracks, which are up top as well. Everything is color coded so that everything is very easy to find. And as you can see from here, temp mixed ADR is the yellow that we see. Any new ADR that we get, we usually color in that kind of more beige white color. On this film in particular, ADR was very abundant. And in our working tracks, sometimes we would have multiple layers of ADR just because of the alternate jokes, and he's wearing a mask and we can put whatever we want in his mouth and do the visual effects to correspond with lip flap and eye animation later in the process. Video 1 is where we keep all our production dailies, and then layers 2 through 4 are usually designated really for our visual effects editors, for temps, for pulls that they've done that are shots that are going to be visual effects. They'll have to, do a visual effects pull to get the plate. So there'll be plates. Again, everything's color coded. Pinks are temps, yellows are vendor comps, which you don't see here, but the finals are green. Previs is that purple little clip right there. You'll also see a lot of collapsed video tracks. In those collapsed video tracks, and we can't open them up here, but if we were to open them up, it would just be nested all the different variations and different versions of a temp visual effects shot.
This will be our opening bone fight. You can obviously see in layer 1, we're using a variation of time warps on some of the action, but there's also those really fine cut chunks there, which would most likely be frame removal on certain fight sequences we would have done, or choreography to tighten things up. Most of that translates up to our VFX editors, who typically would layer in some sort of like blood element or something like that would give us an idea of what we were going for. And then you move all the way up into our layers of vendor effects that just come in and sort of continue to paint titles onto the clips, or extra gore, or paint out any rigs that might have existed. And then you move up to our titles up on the top there. The interesting thing with these titles is that you're editing a fight sequence how you would typically edit a fight sequence, but in this case we had titles that laid in, and that was already set into the script. And so you had to adhere to certain length of titles and placement of titles. So you're sort of locking in like action choreography, musical timing and rhythm, comedic timing and rhythm, along with a certain amount of time that a title might need to be on the screen. Sometimes a title would, if you can see like over here further to the right, you'll see a title that sits on top of like 3 edits, but you can also see a lot in this that a title would usually fit into a single clip. And it was interesting because the edit kind of had to move in tandem with titles and title length, which is nothing I've worked with personally. So that would dictate sometimes how long we needed to be on something. Some shots we'd let hang longer. Sometimes we'd have to move through them quicker to make room for a title and another clip that needed to come after it.
And obviously, all that was part of choosing the song, getting it. So every time you try a different song, they always have different rhythms. So in a movie like Deadpool, where they are very well established and known for their main title sequences, this was definitely a challenging bit of choreo to put together, and a lot, because out of the 70-day shoot, or however much we had, I believe it was 70 days, somewhere in there, 12 of it was shooting this main title sequence out in the snow. This was something that we shot fairly early in the process, and we were able to try many different versions of the song until we landed with In Sync. And once we did, there was really kind of no looking back. Everyone kind of fell in love with it, which made it easier and harder. One little side note about this, we had a couple main title houses pitching us on ideas for the main title sequence and how the titles would actually appear. We knew that we would have some that were engraved in bones. That was going to be the kind of bedrock for all the titles, to have everyone's title kind of in bones. And then we made a shift when we kind of went away from the choreography of what was shot and what was intended to be a main title sequence, when Shane started playing in the sandbox. And thank God he did, because it really took a different life in a different form. And what we did realize, this movie can absorb lots of ideas and lots of different things thrown at it. And once we did realize that, it kind of changed how we looked at everything. And it wasn't through the lens of, we need to honor the script and what can we do to make the funniest movie with whatever tools we want to use.
Yeah, I mean, and if you're just sort of talking about the image that you're actually seeing and the physical edit of it, you can see how so many things need to work in tandem. What would be interesting with a title sequence like this is sometimes there would be an additional title. Once Dean and I had already cut all the choreography and moved it to the song, all of a sudden an additional title would come in, or two. There were certain things that needed to land in other areas. So sometimes there was some real push and pull to try and squeeze all of this information into one sequence that in the end has a very good balance. Like I think people are mostly surprised that there was even different music aligned with it originally, but that's the sort of craft that Dean and I needed to do, is balance music, dancing, violence, choreography, title information, how much you can read, what you can read it on, placement of that title, whether or not that title is mixed in with the environment, or whether or not, and not that these were all Dean and my choices, but in putting the edit together and presenting it to the guys, it was constantly shifting and moving. And I think this was one of those sequences that we knew from the beginning would be tinkered with until we locked picture.
And having all these different layers are what made it easier to be able to move as quickly as we really needed to and make the changes for all the different, not only versions of the songs that we've tried, but then once we did land, being able to rejigger some of the titles once we got the official titles. And so when Shane said, when we would get new titles that come in, they would have to slot in, let's say, in the middle, and we'd have to then go, okay, well, we can't move this title because this one's tied to this and this one's tied to this. So we need to figure out how to make this all work, and having all these different layers and knowing what these layers are, that's what makes it super easy to be able to kind of move things around. And again, the song was locked, so the song wasn't changing. So the only thing that was going to change was the visuals and the sound. So this is why we have not only so many layers, but all individual, so that we can move things independently from each other. So if a title needs to slide off a card, it's good to have them not attached to each other.
At a certain point, you stop working from your dailies once you've sort of gotten to that layer of incoming vendor effects. So I think you just start to sort of apply the effect to that, or that might be a case of, having a title, something's shifted around it, but if we want to land the beat of Deadpool hitting someone with bones on Bye Bye Bye, or land a dance move that's very specific, then I think sometimes it was just about compressing that shot enough to where it doesn't break the shot, but you can manage to squeeze it in the time frame that you need. And I think that's one of the only ones, the sort of time warped effect would have been used on the vendor effects, which is interesting. If you look at our layer here, so right in the middle, you've got sort of the maximum amount of layers that we're using. So on the bottom, we would have had our dailies, which will have some reframes or time warps. That's pretty much just a general rule of like maybe we needed to cut some information out of the side of the screen, or maybe we reframed for the title that was going to fit in a certain place that we wanted the visuals to be a little further away from where the title would have landed. A color effect most likely would have been that, you know, you're shooting an outdoor sequence over the course of many multiple days, so sometimes the natural light might be a little hotter than what's surrounding it. So color effect will help just sort of balance it so that it's viewable. And then we know that we'll take that further on into the color grade. Then I think as you move up, you start to get into the vendor layers that start around V4, V5, V6, and you know you can see time warps on those. Those time warps are most likely applied because there's a title and a specific amount of time or a specific beat that an action or a dance moment might be hitting around it. So I think at that point you stop working with the raw dailies because you have so many other elements that are baked into that shot. Now you've got blood, bones, stunt, etc. that's removed from any wires. And so, you know, now you're needing to work with something that's already got all that stuff applied to it to see if the blood effect will look good. Some of those are going from really, really slow motion, almost half speed time warp into a quick or natural time move to give that little visceral pop. And sometimes you need to apply that kind of effect onto a vendor shot to see if the blood is going to handle the time effect that you want on it or it's going to break the shot.
You'll see here we use markers within the timeline. Normally what we do is assign an editor to color. So in this case, I would be a yellow. Shane would typically be pink. Green would be visual effects. And then if you see down in the tracks below, you'll see some red markers. And those are typically for the assistants. In this case, Jennifer Stellum is putting together our dailies. She will put red locators on every start of every take. And if there's re-racks within the take where the director will start back at one, but they won't cut the camera, she'll do a new red locator on the production daily to show us there's multiple takes within this one take. So this one, there's a couple pink temps from our in-house visual effects team. Normally when we put a green locator on there, it's that we want to make a change within the temp. So it would be something like, oh, we need to add more blood here, or we need to remove this leg and add blood, or something that has to do with a visual change that we want to make within that comp. And then again, you'll see the yellow locator is either a note from me personally or just something from me to remind myself to do something with that take. All those kind of turquoise clips up top, those are all subcaps. So every shot in the movie eventually will get a subcap with a visual effects number. And with that, that's the visual effects title. And we label that track as the visual effects titles so that there's a database tracking every single take, every single shot. And in that database, there will be anything that's ever been done to that clip. And so that track is a very important track for our visual effects team. And the way that Marvel works is essentially we release this in 3D. And when you do a movie in 3D, especially at Marvel, they've come up with a system where visual effects handles all the, what you would call a negative pull, but pulling the original EXR camera raw data to deliver to our vendors for the digital intermediate. So every single shot in this movie, because it was 3D, would have its own unique number assigned to it. So again, this is about midway through just doing test screenings and whatnot. So we haven't labeled every shot, but as you can see, lots of visual effects in this movie. I think we had over 2,000 visual effects shots. This is Reel 7, and in Reel 7, there are many battles, particularly the big ending battle. Lots and lots and lots of visual effects work being done. Lots of temps, lots of comps, and lots of cuts. In retrospect, going back, it's fun to see these timelines because it does remind us of how much work we did have to put into all these edits. And again, you're seeing a mixed track. What you're not seeing is our production work tracks, which would, have 6 to 10 more tracks of audio that we've put in. Shane and I temp out everything. So when we say temp out, like nothing gets shown to anybody until it is with sound and music. And obviously, all that takes lots and lots of time. It's something that we both pride ourselves on, and it's one of those kind of things that some editors do, some editors don't. But the way that I like to work is I like to, whenever I'm presenting any kind of cut to anybody for the first time, I want them to feel like they're watching a movie. And you can't just do that with dialogue. So I like to temp it out with music and sound so that you can get a good feeling of the flow of the scene and whether it's working or not. And Shane definitely shared that same ideology. And it's really what made our partnership so great, because some directors just can't watch things unless they are a little fleshed out. And Sean really does appreciate when we show him what we call a completed edit. Again, all the pink is our visual effects editors doing in-house Avid comps and all the wonderful tools that Avid has to be able to comp stuff and create visuals that need to go together quickly so that we can kind of get a sense of what it's going to look like. And they did a massive, massive, massive amount of work.
This next section we'll get into is our oneer with Deadpool and Wolverine taking on all the variants. This was always designed as one long shot. There was a seamless shot of the guys beginning to fight sort of at the front of the fight with Ladypool and a couple of the other variants and pushing their way all the way through to exit the bus. But when we started to test it, we could feel this sort of dip in energy around this section. And so it left Dean and I, and especially our visual effects team, with some new challenges as far as how to make this sequence flow a little bit more with the rest of the film and listen to the energy of what the film wanted and needed it to be. And so something that seems very simple and easy to execute, it's extremely well thought out in its choreography and production. It's very meticulous, but again, when you get into an edit, you start to need to apply different tools to make it work the way that you intended it to work. And some of those obstacles can be challenging. In this case, they were challenging, but they elevated the experience for the audience. And so they were warranted, and there's fine detail within it. So within the sequence, there's a little more below the top layer that you see that is our little nips and tucks or time variations that we would have had to do to make this sequence work in tandem with the Madonna Like a Prayer that we were using. So the beginning chunk, the longer chunk, is Deadpool and Wolverine walking out from behind the cart, which is one of my favorite shots of the whole movie, and one of my favorite to watch be shot. What's amazing about that shot, just as an aside, is Hugh and Ryan are like lockstep. Their feet are touching the ground at the same time, and the way they even land into position and shift their feet is like, the timing of it is unbelievable. So I guess that's that. You have a few cuts of their dialogue, and then you get into this oneer that we did. And the oneer, as you can see from the first layer, has a few edits in it. The intention of a oneer is to try and keep it as much of a oneer as possible. But, sometimes there are just little things that you need to do to, I don't even know that this is fully cut into, but maybe one little bit might have needed to be stitched for something that bumped in the camera, or time effect was added to it to tighten the beat up a little bit. Because again, similar to what we're dealing with in the opening bone fight, is you have a locked music track and you're trying to land certain pieces onto the music. And sometimes, even though the intention is to keep it as one shot that's unaffected, sometimes that changes based on the parameters that you start to set for yourself that the shot wants and the scene needs, which is to keep that sort of like see and say rhythm on a music where you really want to land something on a downbeat, or clear the screen from everybody so that when Madonna comes back in, we see everyone start to get launched. The momentum of the song and the picture works together. So you'll see little tweaks in there that we would have made to accomplish that. You'll see on the top layer how all that is beautifully sewn together on one shot that seems completely effortless, and everything works in tandem with all the choices that we had to make below it. The thing is, like with everything in this movie, it was just constantly about packing things onto scenes that we'd start to just come up with in the edit as a team of the four of us and with our visual effects team. And so things like that seem simple.
Yeah, and with the layers that we're not even talking about, especially in a oneer like this, is the digital layers that are unseen. So visual effects will have so many different elements of people running solo or the dog running solo that will be then comped into this. So yes, we have to stitch together 4 different pieces of a motion control for the oneer. But what you're not seeing is the 40 layers of Deadpool core that we're adding in there individually. Having obviously our 2 heroes doing the choreography with the core group of stunt people, but then there's all the other ones that we're running and doing digitally where they just shoot randomly and it's like, oh, we need to put a guy there to receive that bullet hit. So they went and shot elements for all that. So it's adding all those players in as well to fill up the screen and have people flying out, and the stunts that were involved were all a separate pass. So they had to get layered in. So the amount of comping and layers that this actual shot entailed, it all adds to the complexity of what looks like just something pretty seamless and easy to do. We appreciate you taking this little walk down memory lane with us, and we hope you have enjoyed Deadpool & Wolverine. If you haven't seen it, please go check it out.